The morning everything changed began with a sound that Daniel Reyes had never been prepared to hear again. The shallow, broken cough of his mother echoing through the narrow apartment just before sunrise. It was the kind of sound that carried fear inside it, the kind that told you time was running out whether you were ready or not. Daniel stood frozen beside the doorway, his 8-year-old son still asleep on the mattress behind him, and in that moment he understood something terrible and unavoidable. The woman who had carried their family on her bent back for years could no longer do it, and if she fell, they all would. Before the story goes any further, take a second. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the idea that one good heart can change an entire life, please like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this exist because people still believe humanity matters. Daniel had never planned to become a maid to a millionaire. He had barely planned to survive the year, since his wife died 3 winters ago from a sudden illness they could not afford to treat properly. Life had shrunk into a series of calculations: rent, food, school shoes, electricity, medicine. His mother, Rosa, had been the quiet miracle that kept them afloat. At nearly 60, with arthritic hands and tired eyes, she cleaned the mansion on the hill 6 days a week. The pay was modest but steady, and the owner, a reclusive millionaire named Victor Harrington, rarely appeared. Rosa never complained. She only said the house was big, silent, and lonely, and that loneliness paid their bills. But now Rosa could barely stand without gasping. The doctor at the free clinic used careful words, but his meaning was clear. Her lungs were weak, her body exhausted, and if she kept pushing herself, she would not last the year. Rosa cried that night, not from pain but from fear of being useless. Daniel sat beside her, holding her thin hand, feeling the weight of a responsibility he did not know how to carry. The next morning, before his courage could fail him, Daniel did something reckless. He put on his mother's worn uniform, smoothed his hair with water because they had no mirror good enough to judge, and walked up the long road to the mansion. He left his son with a neighbor and carried only a bucket, a borrowed bus pass, and a promise to his mother that he would try. He did not tell her everything. He did not tell her how ashamed he felt or how scared he was of being thrown out the gate before he even reached the door. The mansion loomed like a different world, all stone and glass and perfectly trimmed hedges. Daniel felt small walking up the path, his shoes scuffed, his hands rough. When the housekeeper who managed schedules opened the door, Daniel bowed his head slightly and explained without excuses or drama that his mother was sick and he would take her place. He did not beg. He simply stated a fact and waited. To his shock, he was allowed in. The millionaire was away, the woman said. The work needed to be done. Daniel was given instructions and left alone with rooms larger than his entire apartment. As he cleaned, something unexpected happened. He felt his fears soften into focus. There was dignity in work done well, even when no one was watching. He scrubbed floors until they shone, polished surfaces until his arms trembled, and treated the house with the care of someone who understood what it meant to depend on it. Days turned into weeks. Daniel woke before dawn, cooked breakfast for his son, walked him to school, and then climbed the hill to the mansion. His body ached constantly. His hands cracked and bled. At night he collapsed onto the mattress, barely awake enough to help with homework. Sometimes he wondered if he had traded one slow disaster for another. But then he would look at his mother sleeping peacefully, no longer coughing herself awake, and he would keep going. The mansion, for all its luxury, felt haunted by silence. Daniel noticed details others might miss. Dust gathered on framed photographs of a younger Victor Harrington standing beside a woman whose smile had been worn thin by time. Fresh flowers were delivered weekly and left untouched. Entire wings of the house were never used. Cleaning there felt like intruding on grief frozen in place. One afternoon, as rain hammered against the tall windows, Daniel found himself lingering in the library. The shelves were packed with books about business, architecture, history, and art. In a corner sat a small, dusty piano, unused. Daniel did not touch it, but something about the room felt like a confession no one had listened to in years. The day Victor Harrington returned was the day Daniel's secret ended. He was mopping the marble hallway when the front door opened, and heavy footsteps echoed through the house. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. He turned slowly and saw a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive coat, his eyes sharp and tired at the same time. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Daniel explained everything in one breath, about his mother's illness, about replacing her temporarily, about his willingness to leave immediately if needed. He expected anger, humiliation, maybe security guards. What he did not expect was silence so deep it felt heavy. Victor Harrington looked around his own house as if seeing it for the first time in years. He noticed the spotless floors, the polished railings, the warmth where there had once been only cold perfection. He asked questions, not about qualifications or contracts, but about family, about how long Daniel had been doing this, about why he had not asked for help sooner. Daniel answered honestly, his voice steady because he had nothing left to lose. What shocked everyone later was not that Daniel was allowed to stay, but what followed in the weeks after. Victor began coming home earlier. He walked through rooms instead of avoiding them. He sat in the kitchen sometimes, watching Daniel clean, not as a master but as someone trying to remember how to be human. Slowly, almost painfully, the mansion changed. Lights stayed on. Music played softly. Meals were eaten at the table instead of delivered and forgotten. Daniel never overstepped. He worked. He listened when spoken to, and he carried his struggles quietly. But kindness has a way of echoing. When Victor learned that Daniel's son loved drawing, a stack of art supplies appeared on the kitchen counter one evening. When Rosa's medical bills piled up, an envelope arrived with no explanation. When Daniel apologized, Victor only nodded, as if acknowledging something long overdue. The real shock came on a night when Daniel was called into the study. He expected bad news. Instead, Victor handed him a folder. Inside were documents Daniel could barely understand at first. Health coverage for his mother, a permanent position with fair pay, flexible hours, and a scholarship fund set aside for his son's education. The offer was not framed as charity, it was framed as trust. Victor did not become a saint overnight. He was still distant, still guarded. But something had cracked open in him. Years earlier, after losing his wife and child in a car accident, he had closed himself off from people. Rosa's quiet loyalty and Daniel's selfless courage had forced him to confront the emptiness he had been living inside. The mansion was no longer just a monument to wealth. It was becoming a place where lives intersected. Daniel's greatest challenge was not physical exhaustion anymore. It was learning to accept help without feeling small. Pride is a heavy thing when you have been poor your whole life. But each day he reminded himself that this was not about him alone. It was about his son's future, his mother's health, and the possibility that good things could happen without a hidden cost. Months passed. Rosa grew stronger. She no longer blamed herself for resting. Daniel's son began visiting the mansion after school, sitting at the kitchen table drawing while his father worked. Laughter, real unguarded laughter, sometimes echoed through the halls. Staff noticed, neighbors noticed. The story spread quietly, then loudly. A poor single dad had replaced his mother as a maid, and a millionaire had responded not with cruelty but with humanity. Just before the ending, take a moment and tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and what part of this story stayed with you the most. Your words matter more than you know. The moment that stayed with Daniel forever came on a simple afternoon. He stood at the window watching his son run across the lawn, free and unafraid. Rosa sat nearby, knitting slowly, breathing easily. Victor sat at the piano, pressing keys hesitantly, letting sound return to a room that had been silent for years. Daniel realized then that survival was no longer his only goal. Living was. Near the end of this video, if this story touched your heart even a little, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your engagement helps stories of kindness reach people who desperately need them. Daniel never forgot where he came from. He never stopped cleaning, never stopped working hard. But he learned that dignity does not come from suffering in silence. Sometimes it comes from stepping forward when fear tells you to stay invisible. And sometimes the people you expect to crush you are waiting for a reason to remember their own hearts. In the end, nothing about Daniel made headlines except one quiet truth. When a poor single dad stepped into his mother's place with love instead of bitterness, he changed not only his family's future, but the soul of a man who had forgotten what family meant. And that is how a simple act of responsibility became a miracle that shocked everyone who witnessed it.